Masechet Avoda Zara, Daf Ayin Aleph. Nu Mishnah, Boleshet shenichnesah la'ir bishat shalom, chaviyot petuchot asurot, situmot mutarot. Bishat milchama, elu ve'elu mutarot, lefi she'en penai lenasech. If a military unit comes into a city, and there are Jews that live in that city that have barrels of wine, if it's peacetime, then the open barrels are prohibited because the army's there. They see these barrels and they open them up, and or they're open already, and they're going to drink from them and make them prohibited. So we assume that any open barrels, the foreign army of non-Jews, of idolaters, came and they drank from it. But if they're sealed barrels, then it is permitted because we assume that this military unit, they're not going to bother to open a barrel, swish it around, and then seal it closed again. That they're not going to bother to do. Why should they? If they want the wine, they'll just open it and leave it open. Nobody's going to stop them. So if it's open, it's prohibited. If it's closed, then we assume they did not touch it and it's permitted. And if it's a time of war, then both the open ones and the closed ones are permitted. Why? Because they don't have time for libations. They're in the middle of a war. So if they see some wine, yes, they will surely drink it, but they're just going to drink it. They're not going to have in mind, and even if it doesn't take a very long time, they could just swish it around, pour a little bit. It only takes a couple of seconds, and maybe say some kind of prayer. But they're in the middle of war, and they're not thinking about their religious rites that they're doing to their gods, even though you could argue the opposite. Maybe they want to have a libation to their war god. But no, they don't do that. They don't have a chance. So they're only drinking it. And therefore the closed ones, surely they didn't touch because they're not going to bother to reseal it after opening it. And even the open ones, they just drank from it, but they did not use them for a libation. Gemara comments, Urminhi, ayr shekevashuha karkom, kol kohanot shebetocha pesulot. There's a Mishnah Masechet Ketubot that if there is a city that was conquered by an army, then all of the kohanot, all the women who are married to kohanim, are pesulot, are unfit, because we suspect that these soldiers came and raped all the women, and therefore the ones that are married to kohanim cannot return to their husbands. So here we assume that these soldiers have time to go ahead and sin and do things for pleasure. So how come in the Mishnah we say, there's no time to make a libation? A libation only takes a few seconds. And here we say they do have time to go and rape all the women. Amar Rav Mari lenasech en penai lib'ol yesh penai. And Rav Mari says there's a fundamental difference. They're not going to have time for some religious rite to pour wine for a libation to their god. That they're not thinking about. But to take these women, that they have time in the middle of a war. Their energy, their testosterone is going strong, and so they make time for this type of sin with the local woman. So that we do suspect that they took the woman, but we do not suspect that they went and poured wine for a religious rite. Ha'umanim shel Yisrael sheshalach lehem nochri chavit shel yain nesech bescharan mutar lomar tenu lanu et dameha. If you have Jewish workers and the non-Jew paid the workers by sending them some barrels of wine as their payment. So he sends a messenger. The messenger shows up at the home of this Jewish worker and says, here, your boss is paying you with this barrel of yain nesech. So now the Jew, what's he going to do with the barrel of yain nesech? He can't drink it. He can't even benefit from it. So he can say, no, I refuse delivery. I don't want it. Give me instead the cash value of this wine. That's permitted because he never accepted the yain nesech. He says, no, I don't want that. I want the cash value. However, if it already enters into his domain, it's already delivered, he already accepted it, and then afterwards he says, oh wait, what am I going to do with this? I want to change it, exchange it for money, then it's prohibited because In that case, he's benefiting from the yayin nesech. You're not allowed to take yayin nesech, you're not allowed to sell it, and you're not allowed to exchange it for something else. And so then he would be benefiting it. So once it enters into his possession, that's it. He can't do anything with it. But before it enters into his possession, he could say, no, I don't want that. I want money instead. That's okay because he doesn't own the yayin nesech, and therefore he can simply reject it and say, well, you still owe me my salary for my work. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, mutar l'adam lomar legoy, sev afes alai menat hamelech. Now, a similar case, Rav says that a Jew can tell a non-Jew, please go and placate the governmental tax on wine for me. Right? I have to pay some tax on wine by giving the government some wine. And so he asks a non-Jew, would you do me a favor? Pay my wine tax on my behalf, and then I will reimburse you. This is permitted, even though it looks like he's benefiting from yayin nesech, because he is kind of exchanging. Your yayin nesech is going to go to the government to fulfill my obligation. However, it's still permitted because it's indirect, right? You're giving that to the government, and then I am paying you. The non-Jew, he could have paid with something else. He could have paid cash. He could have paid something else. And so it's only indirect that he's getting this benefit. So that's permitted. The yayin nesech never entered into his domain, right? So that would be consistent with the Mishnah. But we have a challenge against Rav from Baraita. Al yomad adam legoy ul tachtai laoser. Baraita teaches that a Jew should not tell a non-Jew, you go in my stead to the commissary, to the wine, to pay the tax. You go instead of me. That's prohibited. Well, that seems to be exactly the same case. Here, Rav said, you're allowed to tell a non-Jew, you go and pay it for me. And here it says, you're not allowed to tell the non-Jew to go and pay it for you. Amar le Rav, o tachtai laoser kamat. Rav says, are you comparing my ruling to the formulation when he says, you go in my stead to the tax collector? Those are not the same. My case is rather is similar to the following case where the Jew tells the non-Jew, please go save me from the commissary. So there's a difference in the way you say the language. If you say, this tax collector is coming, save me from the tax collector, which implies, yes, that the non-Jew is going to go and pay the tax collector and give him yayin nesech. That's permitted. That's more similar to the Mishnah, where he never took possession of the yayin nesech, and so he's just saying, you go and pay the commissary, and then I will pay you back. That's okay, because it's not so direct. But when he says, you go in my stead, you represent me, in that case, when the non-Jew is giving yayin nesech, he's giving the yayin nesech as a shaliach, as a stand-in for the Jew. And so there, because of the language he uses, it's more direct that the non-Jew is giving this yayin nesech. Basically, it's like he's transferring this yayin nesech to the possession of the Jew and saying, oh yeah, I'm giving this, I represent the Jew, I am giving this to you. It's as if the Jew himself is giving the yayin nesech, not that the non-Jew is paying and then the Jew is just paying him back as a loan, which makes it more indirect is okay, more direct is not okay. המוכר ינו לנוכרי, פסק עד שלא מדד, דמיו מותרין. מדד עד שלא פסק, דמיו אסורין. If a Jew is selling wine to a non-Jew, then he should set a price and only then measure it out. If he does that, then he can take the money and the money is permitted. However, if he measures it out, in other words, he takes the wine, this Jew has kosher wine, he pours it into the vessel of a non-Jew, and the vessel of a non-Jew he used before for non-kosher wine might have some residue in it, or the non-Jew might be holding it, and as he's holding it, so he's swishing it around, and so the wine that the Jew pours in, as he pours it in, it becomes yayin nesech. So in that case, if he measures it out first, then already when it's in the non-Jew's vessel, it becomes yayin nesech, and if then only then they make a decision about the price, then that money that he receives is prohibited, because in the second case, he is benefiting from yayin nesech, because at the time when they negotiate the price, it's already yayin nesech. So therefore, don't do the following. Do not take the kosher wine, pour it into the non-Jew's vessel. It becomes yayin nesech. And now you say, let me see how much this is. This is $10. Give me $10. Because then he's accepting $10 for yayin nesech, is exchanging, he's getting benefit from yayin nesech. Don't do it that way. Rather, start off with the wine is in the Jew's possession, and you say, okay, this you want that much? That's going to be $10. Okay, good. Once they fix the price, then it's already done. The transactions are already done, and then he pours it out, and then it's yayin nesech afterwards. That when it becomes yayin nesech, has to be after the transaction is already completed. Now, this Mishnah is going to trigger a long discussion about how a non-Jew can acquire something from a Jew. Even between two Jews, in order to make a transaction effective, it's not enough just to say, oh, I like that item, I'll buy it from you. It's just an oral thing. You have to do something. And the best way to acquire something is actually by lifting it or pulling it, and then it becomes yours. Just paying for it may not be sufficient. And so now we're dealing with how a non-Jew can officially acquire and complete a transaction from a Jew. Is it going to be that the non-Jew has to pull it, or that he just pays for it, or some other way? This has a lot of consequences even till today regarding a non-Jew buying chametz before Pesach. Really, the best way, if it were possible, would be to bring the actual chametz and for the non-Jew to take it, pick it up, pull it, and take it into his possession. That for sure would work. But what if you just transfer money? Is that sufficient? What if you rent out the area where the chametz is, which is what we also do nowadays? Okay, so this is a very important discussion. And it's related to the Mishnah, because in the Mishnah assumes that if one fixes a price, then that already effectuates the transaction. And it also assumes that if the non-Jew would have possession of the wine before the price was fixed, then the non-Jew would possess the wine, and it would be yayin nesech for that reason. Okay, so we begin. Amad Amemar. Mishicha begoy kona. Amemar says that if a non-Jew pulls an item, then he has acquired it. Again, assuming he's not stealing it. We're assuming that this is a transaction where the Jew wants to transfer it, sell it to the non-Jew. Teda, dehani parseh meshadiri pardashne lehadadeh velahadru behu. Amemar says, I'll give you a proof. These Persians, they send gifts to each other, and they never retract the gift. We never see someone send a gift and say, hey, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm taking it back. It must be because once the receiver pulls the gift, then that's it. It's officially his, and the other person cannot get it back. So you see, even the Persians among themselves assume that pulling something acquires it, and so too between a non-Jew and a Jew. Rav Asher Amar, Leolam emalach mishicha begoy ena kona, v'hai dela hadri behu dirmut ruchahu dinikita lehu. Rav Asher, however, is going to disagree with Amemar and he says, I can tell you that pulling something, a non-Jew pulling something, is not an acquisition. And the fact that they don't change their minds and retract their gifts, that's because they're haughty. And if they would go and take something back, it would seem shameful. What do you mean? You gave this to me, now you're taking it back? What's the matter with you? Right? Well, you're so stingy, and so they don't want to be seen in that way, and that's why they don't retract gifts. But really, they would have a legal right, because even though the other party, the receiver, pulled it, it's not officially a transaction. Amar Rav Asher, Mina Amin Allah. Rav Asher says, I'm going to give you a proof, in fact, that pulling something does not effectuate a transaction when a non-Jew pulls an item. Midamar lehu Rav lehanhu saboyata. And Rav Asher's proof is from Rav, who told some wine shopkeepers the following advice. That's advice that's similar to our Mishnah. Ki kailitu chamra legoyim. When you measure out wine for Gentiles and you're going to sell it to them, first take money from them, and that way you'll make the transaction with money, and that's permitted because the wine is still kosher at that point, and only then measure it out for them. או זיפון הוא והדר שכאילו מינייהו, כי החליט את הווה הלוואה גבייהו. And let's say the non-Jew doesn't have any money, he has no cash, and he's saying, please sell it to me on loan. Don't do that. In that case, take some money from your own pocket, the Jew, and give it to the non-Jew as a loan. And then let him give it to you as to effectuate the sale. And then he will owe you the money because that loan will still be outstanding. But you want to make sure that there is a transfer of money, because the transfer of money first will effectuate the transaction, and then the non-Jew already owns it. He owns kosher wine, so you accepted money for kosher wine, which is good. And then you can pour it out and measure it for him, and at which point it will become yain nesech. But then the transaction is already done, so you're not accepting money for yain nesech. Dila abdi tu hachi. And Rav continues and tells these shopkeepers, if you don't do my advice, ki ka have yain nesech birshutaychu ka have. When is it going to become yain nesech? When it's in your possession. Because if you didn't accept money first and you just pour it out first, so you're pouring out the wine, it goes into his vessel, it becomes yain nesech, and now you're going to accept money for yain nesech, vehi shekilitu demeyain nesech shekiltu. And then if you take money, you're taking money for yain nesech, and you cannot benefit from that money. And so that's the end of the quotation of what Rav tells the shopkeepers. And now Rav Asher continues his proof. V'isa kadatech mishicha begoy kona midemashche goy kanye yenesech lahave ad nagabe. Rav Asher tells Amemar, if you think that a non-Jew pulling an item means that he acquires it, then as soon as the non-Jew pulls on the barrel, he has already acquired it and completed the transaction. And it doesn't matter, the payment will come later. Since he pulled it already, so now he owes the money. And the transaction is finished, and the Jew will be able to accept that money later on, because the transaction was already completed the moment that the non-Jew pulled it. And it will not become yain nesech until the non-Jew touches it. And so there's going to be some amount of time between those two things. Surely, you have the Jew, he pours the wine into the vessel of the non-Jew. Let's assume right now it's a clean vessel, there's nothing in it. And so just pouring it in doesn't make it yain nesech. Now the non-Jew, he's not going to just go touch it first. First he's going to pull it, take it into his possession, and then, it could be 2 seconds later, he will go and touch it and make it yain nesech. But that would be okay, because the second he pulls it, if you think that pulling something means we finished the transaction, by pulling it, the transaction is complete. Now, okay, even if he didn't pay yet, he'll have to pay after. He owes money, but the transaction is done. The Jew already is owed the money, and he can accept the money later on because now it's a loan, because the transaction is done. And so afterwards, even 2 seconds later, now he makes a yain nesech. It's okay. The Jew would be fine. So if you think that pulling something is an acquisition, then you wouldn't need the advice of Rav. But from the fact that Rav says, no, don't even pour it first. Take the money first. That means that pulling something by a non-Jew is not a form of acquisition. And the Gemara rejects this. Okay, you're right. This logic would work if the Jew was pouring it into the vessel of a Jew, meaning a kosher vessel, a clean vessel. Then you're right. Then the non-Jew would have to, in fact, pull it first and only then touch it. And so it wouldn't be yain nesech when he pulls it. But we're talking about a case, la sericha de kakayil v'rameh lemana de goy. We're talking about a case where the Jew is pouring it into the vessel of a non-Jew that is not totally clean, and therefore when he pours the kosher wine into the vessel, it's going to be mixed up with the non-kosher wine that's in there, and all become yain nesech. And that's why just from the moment one pours it, it's already yain nesech, and then anything that happens after, just pouring it certainly is not going to make it belong to the non-Jew. The transaction is not completed, and then after that, when he takes the money, that will be taking money for something that is already yain nesech. Now we ask about that. Sof sof ki metal avira demana kanye nesech lahave ad demate le'adite demana. Yeah, but still, once the wine gets into the airspace of the vessel, the non-Jew already acquires it. There's other forms of acquisition, not only pulling it, but also going into the airspace of something that the non-Jew owns. Just like if you throw something into the courtyard of a person, then their courtyard can acquire it for him. Here you could say the vessel. It's his vessel, and the vessel can acquire it for that person. It's like someone brings their own basket into a market, and he puts things in that basket. So by putting it into his domain, his little domain that he's carrying around, so it becomes his. The second it goes into the airspace, so the transaction is already completed at that point, and it does not become yain nesech until it reaches the bottom of the vessel when it makes contact with the other wine that is already there and forbidden. And therefore, it doesn't matter what you say about Meshicha Kona or Meshicha not Kona. Either way, you wouldn't need the advice of Rav, because all the Jew has to do is, since he's pouring it into the vessel of the non-Jew, it gets into the airspace. Just in the airspace, the transaction is completed. And now the non-Jew will have to owe money to the Jew, and he can accept it at any time because that's just a loan. It's already accepted at that point. It only becomes yayin nesech when it reaches the bottom. And so you wouldn't need this advice of Rav at all, according to anyone. So now we have a challenge against Rav. So here's a potential solution. Shema mina nisok chibur. Maybe we can derive from the fact that Rav does say you have to do it the other way around, that a liquid stream is a connection. Now this is a huge controversy, whether a liquid stream is considered connected or not. Like when you have a tameh vessel on the bottom and you're pouring from a tahor vessel, and so it's going downstream, but the second the stream hits the tum'ah in the lower vessel, is it going to go upstream, and do we consider the entire stream to be tameh, and it goes all the way up into the top vessel? This is a big controversy. Well, if you say that a stream of liquid is considered a connection, then that would solve the problem of why Rav said that you have to agree on the money first. Because if you're pouring, so you start pouring, now the second the beginning of the stream hits the bottom, then already it's touching wine that's on the bottom, and the entire stream becomes yayin nesech, and therefore the entire stream, even the part of the stream that didn't enter into the airspace yet, becomes yayin nesech, and only then it enters into the airspace and is acquired. So then it's becoming yayin nesech before the transaction happened, and then that would be a problem, because now the Jew would be accepting money for something that was yayin nesech, because it was yayin nesech before the transaction, and that's why Rav says that you have to do it the other way around. So the Rav would make sense if we assume that a liquid stream is a connection, but we don't want to assume that because that's a matter of huge controversy. And so we give another way of explaining it. La idenakit le goy lekli bide hachiname la siricha demanach ar'a. No, in fact, a liquid stream is not a connection, and we're going to make a distinction between whether the non-Jew is holding the barrel in his hand or if it's on the floor. If he's holding it in his hand as the Jew is pouring into it, because he's holding it, so then he acquires it immediately as it enters in, before it becomes yayin nesech. And in that case, you would not need the ruling of Rav, because the acquisition comes first, the transaction is done, and because since he's holding onto it, so it's going directly into his possession physically, he's holding it, and that will certainly be an acquisition. And so once the transaction is done, then he can take the money after. But Rav's ruling is necessary if the non-Jew is not holding the barrel in his hand, but it's on the floor. If it's just on the floor, then there is no acquisition done at the time that it's being poured in. And then the non-Jew might very well come and just touch it before the money is paid. And so that's why Rav said, make sure to pay the money before. If the non-Jew is holding it, then it's okay. Then you can pour it in, because he would be accepting it immediately, and once the transaction is done, then you can take the money afterwards. But if it's on the floor, then he is not accepting it. There's no transaction there. Once on the floor, and then it become yayin nesech first. And now we ask, v'tikni le kelav. Wait a second. Even if it's on the floor, it's his vessel. He owns the vessel, and so there is a concept of a vessel acquiring something on one's behalf, like a courtyard, as we mentioned before. Shemat mina kelav shelokech b'reshut mocher. Should we derive from here that the vessels of a buyer, when you're in the domain of the seller, will not acquire for him? So in that example, I bring my basket into someone else's shop and I fill up the thing while in his store. So according to this, since I'm in his store, my basket cannot acquire items. My basket can only acquire items in my domain or in a public domain, but not in someone else's domain. This also is a matter of huge controversy. So this would make sense if you assume that the item, the basket, the vessel of a buyer does not acquire when it's in someone else's domain. So should we then therefore conclude from this that there is no acquisition? Lo leolam emalach kana lokeach. No, in fact, we can explain this even if you say that the buyer does acquire it. V'hacha b'mayaskinan kegon de'ika akabat yayin apume dechuzanta dekama kama insich le. But we're talking here, Rav's case where he says you have to make sure to get the money first, is talking about a case where there is a remnant of wine in the non-Jew's vessel. There's some yayin nesech at the mouth of the jug. And therefore, as the Jew pours the wine into the non-Jew's jug, as everything that touches that remnant of wine at the mouth of the jug is going to mix with it and become prohibited. And therefore, even if you say that the vessel of a non-Jew does acquire it, no matter where it is, even if it's in the domain of the seller, it could acquire. So yes, if it was clean, at least clean, even clean just on top, then yes, he could acquire it. The transaction would be done, and then the Jew would be able to accept the money. But Rav is talking about a case where it's dirty at the mouth of it, and therefore, as it enters in, it becomes already yayin nesech. And once it's yayin nesech, and before the transaction is completed, then the Jew would not be able to accept the money, and that's where Rav gave his advice. Uchman, like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, ha'amar yimacher kolo lenochrim chutz midemei nesech shebo. This logic only makes sense if you think that any wine that touches yayin nesech all becomes yayin nesech itself. But who is that of that? Who thinks that? Not Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because if it was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he says that when you have some kind of a mixture of kosher and non-kosher wine, you can sell the whole thing, and you just exclude the amount, the value of the yayin nesech that's in it. So if you have a barrel and there's 10% yayin nesech in it, and the whole barrel sells for $100, so then you can keep $90, and $10 that you have to throw into the Dead Sea and get rid of. And so here it would be okay, because except for that drop that's on the top, that's worth $1. Okay, so take $1 and throw it out, but the rest will be permitted, and there would be no problem. So it must be that, are we not following Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? And we explain Midihu ta'ama ela l'Rav. This whole line of questioning and answering is only to explain Rav's advice that you should take the money first. And what does Rav think? Ha'amar Rav halacha Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav does think that the law is like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, so we have to follow him. But Rav gives an important limitation, and he says halacha Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel chavit bechavit, aval lo yayin beyayin. He says that we only follow this ruling when it comes to barrels that were mixed together. Let's say you have 10 barrels. One barrel of non-kosher wine gets mixed up with 9 other barrels of kosher wine, and now you don't know which one is which. There, the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would say, sell them all, and then take 10% and throw that out, and the rest you can keep, as long as the barrels are separate, and all the yayin nesech is only one in one of the barrels, or however many, but they're in separate barrels. However, if the wine itself gets mixed up, it doesn't matter, even if it's 2% wine, whatever percent wine in a big barrel, then all of it will become prohibited. And you can't just take out the $1 for the drop that's on top and say throw that out and the rest is okay. According to Rav's halacha, we followed about Rashbag, that only applies to chavit bechavit, but wine, once the wine itself mixes, then all the wine becomes yayin nesech. And now we understand why Rav would say that if in that case where it goes in, the Jew is pouring it in, but there's yayin nesech at the top of it, that all will become prohibited, and that's why Rav says make sure to take the money first and only then pour it in. Metibe, now we challenge the statement of Amemad, who says that pulling something is an effective transaction with a non-Jew, that would work both ways. Either a non-Jew pulling something to acquire something from a Jew, or a Jew pulling something to acquire something from a non-Jew. Amemar thinks that works, but this Braita seems to contradict him, because the Braita teaches, Halokeach girutaot min hagoyim, umasa behen avoda zara. If someone buys some metal scraps, some gold, scraps of gold, from a non-Jew, so he thinks he's buying just scraps of regular gold that he can use and fashion into jewelry or something else, and he's looking through them and he finds a little idol. So this is a problem, because this idol he cannot use. He can't melt it down, use it for something else. He can't get any benefit from it, and so he wants to return it. If the Jew did not yet give over any money, and he pulled the metal scraps but did not pay any money yet, then he can return it. No transaction happened. But if he did already pay for it and he pulled on and took the metal scraps, then he cannot give it back and get his money back. No, too late. The transaction is already done, and so he has to take that little idol and throw it into the Dead Sea. That's the Baraita. Now here's the challenge. If you think that pulling something is an effective transaction with a non-Jew, then how could it be that in the Resha he can return it? What does it matter if he gave money or didn't give money? He pulled it, and if that's a form of acquisition, as Memar says, then he should not be able to return it. It's already his, and by returning it, so now he's making an exchange with idolatry, which is prohibited. And even though he didn't pay yet, he owes the money. The transaction is already done. Challenge against Amemar. Amar Abaye, Mishum de Merzeki Mekach Ta'ut. Abaye says, because it looks like a Mekach Ta'ut. Now what he means is that it is a Mekach Ta'ut. Even though there was a transaction, but the transaction was based on a false premise. He never meant to buy an Avoda Zara. So I didn't pay for this. I didn't want this. So it's to begin with, the entire transaction was false. Now, why does it say mechzeh? We'll see in a second. Amar Rava, Resha mekach ta'ut sefa, la mekach ta'ut. So Rava asks, how come in the Resha you say that's a mistaken transaction? You can change it, but in the sefa where he gave money, then shouldn't that also be a mekach ta'ut? It's the same thing. What's the difference if he gave money or not? Just pulling it effectuates the transaction. So whether you gave money or didn't give money actually doesn't change anything. And if you gave money, even if you gave money, if it is really a mekach ta'ut, then you should be able to go back and say, this is not what I asked for. This is not what I had in mind. Mistaken transaction, so I'm giving it back. So rather, Rava says, in fact, both cases are mekach ta'ut. Zuzeh mitchazek avodah zara biyad Yisrael. And so the difference is that in the Resha, because he did not give money, it doesn't look like there is idolatry in the hands of Israel of a Jew, because he didn't get money. So I'm just holding on to it. And so, in fact, yes, pulling in general is a form of transaction, but here it's a mekach ta'ut. That's why he can give it back. If someone was looking on and didn't know what they were dealing with, what they were talking about, then they would all they would see is that a Jew picked up this thing, saw an idol, and gave it back. So it wouldn't look like it was his property. He was just holding it and gave it back. Whereas in the sefa, where there is an exchange of money, so it looks like he exchanged money. It looks like the Jew actually acquired the idol and now is exchanging it back for money. And so they don't know that he meant only to buy metal scraps and didn't want an idol, and therefore it's a mekach ta'ut. So technically it would be okay because it is a mekach ta'ut, so there was no transaction to begin with. But it looks like to an onlooker like he acquired the idol and now is exchanging it. And so that's why it's prohibited when there is money involved. And now Mordechai Shisha, son of Rav Chisda, has a challenge against Rav Asher, who says that pulling is not a form of acquisition with a non-Jew. Tashema hamocher yeno lenochri pasak ad shelo madad damav mutarim v'amart meshicha begoy ena kona amai damav mutarim. And this challenge is from our very Mishnah that says if someone sells wine to a non-Jew, if he decided the price first and only then measured, then that's fine because you decided the price first. Okay, so that's it. You have the price, the transaction is done, and then you can measure it out and you can accept the money later. That's okay. But if here's my question: if you say that pulling by a non-Jew is not a form of acquisition, then why can he accept the money later? Just saying we agree on $10. How does that help anybody? So you agreed on $10. Do you think that is a form of acquisition? That's not a form of acquisition. And the non-Jew pulling on the barrel is not a form of acquisition. So actually, there's not going to be an acquisition until when? Until the money actually is given. But before that, the non-Jew is going to touch the wine. So how does it help that you're deciding a price beforehand? You're deciding the price. That's not a transaction. It's going to become yayin nezich before the money is paid. So that's an important question. And the answer is hachamaz kinadak dem le dinad. Oh, we're dealing with the case where the non-Jew gave a down payment in advance. Not for the entire thing, but at least something. He gave $10 in advance. I'm going to buy some wine from you, so hold on to this. So because there was a transfer of money beforehand, so then that and they set the price. So he gave money. So as the giving the money was just like an open check, and then they decide the price. Once they decide the price, okay, therefore he has the money already. So the transaction is completed when they decide the price. And then whatever happens after doesn't matter. That becomes yayin nesech afterwards. So we ask, if so, how can you explain the continuation of the Mishnah that says if he poured it first and then set the price, then the money is prohibited. But if he already gave a dinar beforehand, then why is the money prohibited? Because again here, there was a payment beforehand, so that payment is already done. And therefore, when he measures it out, so there was already a payment. So you should say the transaction was already done, and therefore this it becomes ein nesach only after the transaction. So what about that? Amar le Rav Ashi explains. Udidach amart mishicha begoy kona amar eshadamav mutarim v'sefadamav asurin. Rav Ashi says, listen, I have an answer, but first I'm going to make you explain the difference between the resha and the sefa, and once you explain it, then I'll be able to explain it easily. So according to you, Amemar, and that you say that pulling by a non-Jew is a form of acquisition, how come in the Resha, when you set the price first, you can take the money afterwards? And in the Sefa, when you measure it out first, it's prohibited. If pulling is a form of acquisition, so what's the difference between setting the price and not setting the price? Setting the price is not a form of acquisition anyway, and the fact that he pulled it, so he pulls it first, so it's already his, and he touches it afterwards, so it's okay. Resha and Sefa according to you. Rather, I know what you're going to say. Rav Ashi tells Amemad, Pasak samcha da'ateh, lo pasak la samcha da'ateh. If they fix a price, then his mind is fixed upon the fact that when he pulls it, then he relies on the pulling it to say, yes, it's mine. In other words, if you pull it, lo pasak, if you don't set a price, then when he pulls it, he's not relying on that fact that he pulled it to say that it's mine, because they haven't agreed to a price. So since you haven't agreed to a price, look, if you just pull something that belongs to somebody else, and they have no intention of giving it to you, it doesn't become yours. That's just called stealing. And so if they set a price, then the non-Jew says, oh, he set a price, he wants to sell it to me. So then he relies on that when he pulls it to say, okay, this is a final transaction, and then it's okay because the transaction is done. It becomes yayin nesech after the transaction is done, so the payment can be after. The payment is just a loan. But if they did not decide on the price, then the non-Jew does not rely on the pulling it to be a full transaction, because he knows that they might not agree on the price, and then he'll have to give it back. And so in that case, because it's not a final transaction, if he takes it and then he'll touch it, so then the Jew cannot accept the money afterwards. So that is how Amemad is going to have to explain this Mishnah. So now Rav Ashi continues and said, since you are accepting this logic, I can use the logic too. Even though he gave him a dinar in advance payment, nevertheless, once they set a price, then the non-Jew relies on the fact that they made a price to say, okay, he agreed, he's not going to cancel. So then that down payment that he made before, it becomes an official transaction. So you need two things. You need the giving of a coin and the deciding of the price, because then it won't be canceled. And so that is a final transaction. And in fact, if it becomes yain esech after that, it doesn't matter. But if they did not fix a price, so even though he gave an advanced payment, but they didn't agree on the price, and if they end up not agreeing on the price, they say, listen, no, we don't agree on the price, forget it, give me my money back. And so just giving the money without knowing what the price is not a final transaction. And therefore, if you pour it out before fixing a price, then the non-Jew will touch it. It will become yain nesech. If you fix the price only afterwards is the transaction finalized, and that would be a problem. So we can, in fact, explain the Mishnah both according to Amemad and according to Rav Asher. Amar le Ravina le Rav Asher, Tashema, da Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Noach neherag al pachot mishaveh peruta velo nitan lehishabon. And now Ravina has another challenge against Rav Asher. From the following statement that Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Noach, a Noahite, a non-Jew, is given the death penalty for stealing, even if it's only less than a shaveh peruta. That's the law. Bnei Noach, they only have 7 mitzvot, but the punishment for all of them is the same. It's all capital punishment. And furthermore, it's not subject to the law of returning. He's going to get the death penalty. He doesn't have to return it. At first glance, it seems he doesn't have to return it because it's less than a peruta. So that people forgive a less than a peruta. And so it's not something that it would be liable to return. It's bad enough he gets the death penalty. That's the Rabbi Yochanan's Pesach. Now, here's the proof. According to you, who says that pulling something is not a form of acquisition, why would you kill this Noahide? So what? He pulled on someone else, on a Jew's money, but pulling is not an acquisition. So he just means he moved it around. There's no such thing as stealing just by pulling something, so he shouldn't be killed. And the answer is Mishum de Sa'adeh Israel. No, he is killed because he caused distress. Even though actually he didn't acquire that coin by pulling it, but still the Jew doesn't know where it is and he's distressed. And so for that crime, he gets the death penalty. Umay lo nitan lehishavon. Now, what does it mean that it's not subject to restitution? If he never acquired it, then what does it mean that he doesn't have to return it? Obviously, he doesn't have to return it if he never acquired it because pulling is not a form of acquisition. And the answer is de'eno betorat hishabon. The answer, that's precisely what it means. It means it's not within the possibility of returning it, precisely because it's not technically a theft. It never belonged to him to begin with, because pulling something does not make an acquisition. So that's precisely what it means. Okay, but now let's see if that fits with the continuation of Rabbi Yochanan's Pesach. If another Noahide comes and steals it from the first Noahide thief, Neheragalav, the second person, also would get the death penalty. Bishlam Resha Mishum Desare Israel. Now I understand the Resha, where the first Noahide thief steals it from a Jew, he is causing distress to the Jew. That's why he is killed. Ela Sefa, my Avid. But in the Sefa, what did he do? Because again here, just pulling something is not a cause of, it does not make a transaction, so there's no actual theft here. So then why would the second Noahide, who just moved something around, he's not causing distress to an Israelite, and he's not stealing anything because he just moved something and didn't actually acquire it, so there's no act of theft. So why should the second thief get the death penalty? So this is a final conclusive proof that for non-Jews, pulling something, whether it be a non-Jew to another non-Jew or a non-Jew to a Jew or a Jew to a non-Jew, pulling an item is in fact a valid form of acquisition, and that is today's conclusion. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.